Are you lost, Grandpa? The voice was sharp. It was young. It was laced with the kind of casual disdain that only comes from someone who has never been truly tested. The old man did not turn. He sat on a simple wooden bench, a long, canvas-wrapped object resting across his lap. His back was stooped, a gentle curve of bone and time that spoke of heavy burdens carried long ago. His hands, gnarled and spotted with age, rested calmly on the worn fabric. He was watching the heat shimmer rise from the packed earth of the rifle range. Far downrange, state-of-the-art digital targets flickered, registering phantom hits from the wind. Marines in crisp, modern camouflage lay prone, their carbon fiber and polymer rifles looking like surgical instruments of a new age. The air smelled of burnt powder, hot metal, and dried dust. It was a familiar smell, a smell from another life. "Sir, I'm talking to you." The voice was closer now. The old man could see the shadow of polished combat boots falling over his own worn leather shoes. He finally turned his head, a slow, deliberate movement. His neck cracked softly, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Standing before him was a Marine corporal. He was everything the old man was not. He was straight-backed, his uniform impeccable, his jaw set with the rigid certainty of youth. A name tape above his pocket read Evans. "This is a live-fire training area," Corporal Evans said, his arms crossed over a chest puffed with minor authority. "It's not a public park. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The old man's eyes, pale blue and webbed with wrinkles, took in the corporal. They held no fear, no anger, no surprise. They held only a deep, quiet stillness, like the bottom of a well. "I have an appointment," the old man said. His voice was raspy, thin, but steady. Evans let out a short, incredulous laugh. A younger Marine standing behind him, a private, smirked. "An appointment? With who?" "The wind." Evans gestured dismissively at the empty range beyond the firing line. "Look, I don't know how you got on base, but security is on its way. Just make it easy on everyone and come with me." The old man's gaze drifted back to the shimmering targets. "They said to wait here." "Right." "They did." The sarcasm was thick. "You and the general, best pals, I'm sure. Now let's go." Evans reached for the old man's arm. He did not touch him. The old man's hand, the one resting on the canvas bundle, shifted slightly. It was not a threatening move. It was a simple adjustment. But in that small motion, there was an economy, a purpose, that made the corporal pause. It was the kind of movement a predator makes in its sleep. Evans's eyes narrowed, falling to the object in the man's lap. "What's in there, Grandpa?" "A magic wand. A tool," the old man replied, his voice unchanged. "A tool for what?" "Propping open a door." The private behind Evans snickered. "For making a point," the old man said, so quietly the wind almost stole the words. This seemed to infuriate the corporal. His authority, so absolute in his small world of regulations and firing lanes, was being met not with defiance, but with a placid indifference he couldn't comprehend. It was like shouting at a mountain. "Let me see it," Evans demanded. It was not a request. Base regulations state all privately owned firearms must be inspected and logged at the armory. You bypass protocol. That weapon is unauthorized. The old man sighed. It was a weary sound, the exhalation of a man who had seen this same play enacted with different actors for decades. The arrogance of the uninitiated. The certainty of the ignorant. Slowly, deliberately, he began to unbuckle the leather straps on the canvas case. The straps were old and cracked, but they moved smoothly under his practiced fingers. He folded back the heavy fabric. Inside, nestled in worn, oil-stained sheepskin, was a rifle. It was not the sleek, black, modular weapon systems the other Marines used. This was a creature of wood and steel. It was an M14, but not one from any museum or armory. The walnut stock was dark with age and linseed oil, but it was also scarred and customized. It was shorter than standard, the balance clearly altered. The steel of the receiver and barrel was a dull, non-reflective gray, worn smooth in places where hands had held it for countless hours. The scope mounted on top was an anachronism, a long tube with simple crosshairs, its adjustment knobs oversized and marked with what looked like hand-etched calibrations. Evans stared at it, a look of utter contempt on his face. "You're kidding me," he scoffed. "Is that a museum piece?" Did you steal that from a VFW hall? The private stepped closer, peering at the rifle. My great-granddad had one of those. Used it for deer hunting. I bet, Evans sneered. You probably 3D printed it in your garage. Look at that wooden stock. A good rain would warp it out of true. The old man said nothing. He simply ran a thumb along the stock, his touch gentle, reverent. His finger traced a small, almost invisible carving near the trigger guard. It was a single, stylized bird. A raven. Corporal Evans leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, mocking whisper. Seriously, old-timer, what do you think you're going to do with that thing? The windage alone out here would throw that heavy round a foot off target at 500 yards. Our boys are hitting man-sized targets at twice that, with thermal optics. This is a different world. The old man's pale blue eyes finally met his. The world is the same. The wind is the same. The distance is the same. Only the tools and the men have changed. The quiet defiance, the utter lack of intimidation, was the final straw for Evans. He was losing face in front of his subordinate. He had to reassert control. He had to make this old man small. He reached out a gloved hand and, with a flick of his finger, tapped the ancient scope. This piece of junk. Then, his fingers slid down, tracing the worn wood of the stock until it rested on the small, carved raven. He pressed down, a deliberate act of disrespect, a physical violation of something clearly held sacred. And what's this supposed to be? Your little good luck charm. The moment his finger touched the carving, the world shifted for the old man. The scent of hot dust and cordite was suddenly replaced by the smell of cold mud and petrichor. The bright California sun vanished, replaced by a triple canopy jungle that choked the light, leaving only a gloomy, perpetual twilight. The rhythmic crack of modern rifles became the deafening roar of a forgotten war. He was not an old man on a bench. He was a young man in the mud, rain plastering his hair to his skull. His knuckles were bloody. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. Beside him, another young man lay still, his eyes open to the weeping gray sky. The friend's hand was still warm. In that hand, he'd been whittling a small piece of wood. A raven. He'd always been carving them. Said they were messengers. The rifle, this very rifle, had been that friend's. It had been passed to him in that moment of blood and rain, a legacy bequeathed in a final, rattling breath. The weight of it was the weight of a promise. The carving was not a charm. It was a tombstone. The memory lasted only a second, but it was a lifetime. When the old man's focus returned to the present, something had changed in his eyes. The placid well now had a flicker of cold fire in its depths. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply looked at Corporal Evans. And for the first time, the corporal felt a sliver of doubt, a cold prickle on the back of his neck. He had crossed a line he did not know existed. High above, in the observation tower, Gunnery Sergeant Reyes lowered his binoculars. He hadn't heard the conversation, but he had seen the entire exchange. He was a man of 30 years in the Corps. He had seen colonels who commanded with a whisper and privates who blustered like generals. He knew how to read men. The old man on the bench didn't move like a civilian. Civilians fidgeted. They looked around. They were intimidated by the uniform and the setting. This man was perfectly, unnaturally still. It was the stillness of a sniper in a hide, of a hunter waiting for his prey. It was a stillness born of immense discipline. Reyes had been watching him for 10 minutes, ever since the old man had walked through the gate with a simple, laminated pass that had a priority code Reyes hadn't seen in 2 decades. The gate guards had waved him through without a second glance, cowed by the authority of the code itself. Now, seeing Corporal Evans, one of his own men, puffed up and confrontational, Reyes felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Evans was a good Marine by the book. He knew the regulations, but he had no instinct. He saw a frail old man, not the coiled potential beneath. Reyes zoomed in with his binoculars, focusing on the rifle case on the ground. A faded stenciling was barely visible. E. Thorn. Below it, a unit insignia, so faded it was almost a ghost. A raven in a circle. Reyes's blood ran cold. He had seen that insignia only once before, in a classified history briefing at Quantico. It was from a unit that didn't officially exist. A phantom group from a forgotten conflict, spoken of only in whispers and redacted after-action reports. He turned from the window and grabbed the secure phone line. He didn't call the base commander. He didn't call the officer of the day. He bypassed the entire chain of command. He dialed a number he had been given once by a master gunnery sergeant at the Pentagon, a man to whom he owed his career. He had been told to use it only in a God himself has shown up and you don't know what to do situation. This felt like one of those situations. The phone was answered on the first ring. Master Gunnery Sergeant Davis. The voice was impatient, busy. Master Guns, it's Gunnery Sergeant Reyes at Pendleton Range Complex 4. What is it, Gunny? I'm in a briefing with the Commandant. Apologies for the interruption, Master Guns, Reyes said, his own voice tight and professional. I have a situation here. A civilian on my range. An old man. So have the MPs escort him out, Davis grumbled. Why are you calling me? His name is Thorne, Reyes said, his eyes still locked on the scene below. Elias Thorne. He's carrying a custom M14 with a raven carved into the stock. The line went dead silent. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the connection. Reyes could picture the master gunnery sergeant on the other end, frozen, the world falling away. When Davis spoke again, his voice was completely different. It was stripped of all impatience. It was tight, urgent, and laced with something that sounded like pure, unadulterated fear. Reyes, he said, his voice a strained whisper. Are you absolutely certain of the name? Affirmative, Master Guns. Thorne. Elias. And the Raven. I saw it through the glass. Corporal Evans is hassling him about it right now. A string of curses came through the phone, quiet and vicious. Son of a bitch. Listen to me, Gunny. Listen to me very carefully. You get on that radio and you call off the MPs. Tell them it's a false alarm. Then, you will do absolutely nothing. Do not approach him. Do not let your men touch him. Do not let him leave. The general is on his way. The general, Master Guns. Not a general, you idiot. The general. General Vance. He just left the briefing like he was shot out of a cannon. He's coming there personally. ETA is 5 minutes. He's coming in hot. Just keep everyone back. And for the love of God, pray your corporal hasn't done anything stupid. The line went dead. Reyes stood frozen for a moment, the receiver still pressed to his ear. General Marcus Vance, the commandant of the Marine Corps, was coming here. Now. He looked back down at the range. Corporal Evans, full of confidence again, had taken the old rifle from Mr. Thorne. He was holding it up, showing it to the other young Marines who had gathered, pointing out its flaws, laughing. Oh God, Reyes whispered. He's done something stupid. Down on the firing line, Evans was enjoying his moment. He had won. The old man had surrendered the ridiculous weapon without a fight. He held it up for the others to see. Look at this, he declared. The stock is probably unbalanced. The action is 50 years old. I'm surprised it even cycles. He worked the bolt. The sound it made was not the clatter of an old, worn-out machine. It was a smooth, tight, hydraulic shhhh click. It sounded like precision. It sounded expensive. The other Marines noticed it too, their smirks faltering slightly. Evans ignored it. He was committed. And this scope, you'd be lucky to hit the dirt in front of you. He turned to the old man, who now stood beside the bench, his hands clasped behind his back. He was watching, his expression unreadable. Tell you what, old-timer, Evans said with a magnanimous, condescending grin. Before we escort you to the gate, let's see what this piece of history can do. Let's see you make your point. He gestured to the far end of the range. See that? He was pointing at a small, steel silhouette target, one reserved for sniper qualification. It was 1,000 yards away, a tiny speck shimmering in the heat. Even with the advanced optics on their own rifles, hitting it was a challenge that required skill and a calm day. Today, a tricky crosswind was gusting across the range. Hit that, Evans said, a laugh in his voice. Hit that, and I'll buy you a steak dinner. The other Marines chuckled. The challenge was absurd. It was impossible. The old man, Elias Thorne, looked at the distant target. He looked at the windsock, gauging the shifting currents. He looked at the rifle in the corporal's hands. Then he looked at Evans. 1 round, he said. Evans's grin widened. You only got 1 in you. I only need 1, Elias replied. He took the rifle from the corporal. His hands settled on it not like a man holding a tool, but like a man greeting an old friend. He slid a single, heavy-looking cartridge from the pocket of his worn trousers. It was hand-loaded, the brass polished to a dull sheen. He seated it in the chamber and closed the bolt with that same, impossibly smooth sound. He didn't lie prone. He didn't use the bench for support. He simply stood, raised the rifle to his shoulder, and settled it into his body. And in that instant, the stooped, frail old man disappeared. The curve in his back straightened. His shoulders squared. The rifle became an extension of his arms, his eye, his will. He was no longer an old man. He was a statue of purpose. He was a monument. He took a breath, let half of it out. The world went silent. And then they heard it. A low rumble, growing rapidly louder. It was the sound of powerful engines moving at speeds they were not designed for on a dirt service road. Heads turned. A convoy of 3 black, government-plated SUVs was barreling towards the range, kicking up a massive plume of dust behind them. They didn't slow. They screamed past the parking area and slid to a halt on the gravel right behind the firing line, tires spitting rocks. Doors flew open before the vehicles had even stopped rocking. Men in sharp suits and earpieces jumped out, weapons holstered but hands ready. They formed a perimeter, their faces grim and professional. The rear door of the lead vehicle opened. Out stepped a man in a perfectly pressed uniform adorned with 4 stars. He was tall, imposing, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the wind. It was a face known to every Marine present. General Marcus Vance, Commandant of the United States Marine Corps. And his face was a mask of cold fury. He ignored the salutes that snapped up around him. He ignored the stunned faces of the young Marines. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, scanned the scene and found their target. Elias Thorne. With a terrifying, focused intensity, General Vance strode across the gravel. He moved with the coiled energy of a thunderclap about to break. Every Marine, including Corporal Evans, felt an instinctual urge to shrink, to disappear. The general stopped 1 foot in front of the old man. Elias had not lowered the rifle. He still held it, aimed down range, perfectly still. For a heart-stopping moment, the 2 men just looked at each other. The highest-ranking officer in the Marine Corps and the unknown old man in dusty clothes. Then, General Vance's back went ramrod straight. His hand snapped to the brim of his cover in the sharpest, most perfect salute any of the Marines had ever witnessed. It was a salute of profound, almost painful respect. Mr. Thorne, the general's voice boomed across the silent range, raw with emotion. It is an honor, sir. Corporal Evans felt his blood turn to ice water. His jaw hung open. Mister? Sir. Elias Thorne finally lowered the rifle. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to the general. Marcus, you made good time. They told me you were here, Vance said, his hand still holding the salute. They told me what was happening. He slowly lowered his hand and turned his gaze upon the assembled Marines. His eyes swept over them, and under that gaze, they felt like utter failures. Finally, his eyes landed on Corporal Evans, who was still holding his gape-mouthed stare. The general's fury had cooled. It had become something far worse. It had become a quiet, lethal calm. Corporal, Vance said, his voice deceptively soft. General. Evans stammered, fumbling into a salute. Vance ignored it. He gestured with his chin towards Elias. Do you have any idea who this is? No, General. Evans whispered, his throat dry. Vance took a step closer, his voice dropping even lower, forcing everyone to strain to hear. This is Mr. Elias Thorne. He doesn't have a rank because the ones he was offered, he refused. He doesn't wear a uniform because he has earned the right to wear whatever he damn well pleases. He is here today because I asked him, I begged him, to consult on our new long-range optics program. Because even with all our satellites and computers, nobody, and I mean nobody, knows more about sending a single piece of lead exactly where it needs to go than this man. He paused, letting the words hang in the hot, still air. You see this rifle? He gently took the M14 from Elias's hands, holding it with a reverence that bordered on worship. This isn't a museum piece. This is a legend. In the highlands of a country that is not on any map you have ever seen, they called this rifle the Widowmaker. They called the man holding it the Ghost of the Valley. The general looked at the stunned faces of the young Marines. This man, with this rifle, held a mountain pass by himself for 3 days against an enemy battalion. He did it so my father's recon team could get out. He did it with a shattered arm and 3 rounds left in his magazine when relief finally arrived. He refused the Medal of Honor because, he said, he was just keeping a promise to a friend. Vance's gaze drifted to the small raven carved into the stock. His voice cracked with emotion. My father was that friend. He died in Mr. Thorne's arms. This man carried him for 5 miles out of that jungle. This carving is his memorial. Silence. Absolute, crushing silence. The only sound was the wind, whistling mournfully across the range. Finally, Vance's cold, unforgiving eyes returned to Corporal Evans. You, he said, the single word a blade of ice. You mocked his weapon. You questioned his presence. You put your hands on a piece of history you are not worthy to even look upon. You mistook a monument for an old man. He leaned in until he was inches from the corporal's face. You stand on ground he consecrated with blood you can't even imagine. You wear a uniform he gave you the freedom to wear, and you treated him with disrespect. You have disgraced that uniform, Corporal. You have disgraced this corps. Evans was white as a sheet, trembling. He looked like he was about to faint. Just then, Elias Thorne placed a gentle hand on the general's arm. He's just a boy, Marcus, the old man said, his voice calm and forgiving. He's learning. We were all that boy once, full of rules, empty of understanding. He turned his pale blue eyes to Evans. The fire was gone, replaced once more by that deep, quiet well of patience. The uniform doesn't make the man, son. The man honors the uniform. Remember that. He then turned his attention back to the task at hand. He took his rifle back from the general. He settled it back into his shoulder, his eye finding the scope. The wind gusted. He did not seem to notice. He took a breath. The rifle cracked. A single, sharp report that echoed off the hills. 1,000 yards away, the steel silhouette target rang with a clear, high ping. A puff of dust kicked up from the dead center of the target. A perfect shot. Elias lowered the rifle, worked the bolt, and ejected the spent casing. He caught it in his palm before it could hit the ground. He looked at Corporal Evans, whose face was now a mask of utter, soul-shattering shame. He held out the warm brass casing. A souvenir, Elias Thorne said softly. To help you remember. General Vance pointed a rigid finger at Gunnery Sergeant Reyes, who had come down from the tower. Gunny, take this corporal and his fire team into custody. Sir, Reyes asked, confused. They are not being disciplined, the general clarified, his voice ringing with authority. They are being re-educated. You will form a new training detail. They will be your first students. They will learn the entire, unredacted history of this corps. They will study the lives of men like Mr. Thorne. They will learn the difference between regulation and respect. We will call it the Thorne Protocol, and it will be mandatory for every Marine who thinks the uniform gives them authority they haven't earned. 6 months passed. The Thorne Protocol was now a legendary part of Marine training, a brutal but effective course in humility and history. In a quiet diner miles from any base, Elias Thorne sat by a window, sipping coffee. The door chimed. A young man in civilian clothes walked in. He was no longer a corporal. His haircut was still military, but his shoulders were not squared with arrogance anymore. They were squared with a quiet sense of purpose. It was Evans. He saw Elias and froze. For a long moment, he stood by the door, wrestling with himself. Then, he walked over to the booth. Mr. Thorne, he asked, his voice hesitant. Elias looked up and smiled a little. Hello, son. Have a seat. Evans slid into the booth, his hands twisting a napkin on the table. Sir, I wanted to apologize. For that day, I was arrogant. I was ignorant. There's no excuse. What you said, and what I learned, it changed me. He reached into his pocket and placed something on the table. It was the spent shell casing, polished to a mirror's shine. I carry it every day, Evans said. To remember. Elias Thorne looked at the young man, truly looked at him, and saw the change. The hard shell of pride had been cracked open, and a better man was growing in its place. He reached across the table and placed his weathered hand over the younger man's. The heaviest things we carry aren't our rifles, son, Elias said, his voice gentle. It's our history. Learn to carry it well.